Set in the sterile, tight corridors of Starhaven, where one bed, one rule is the motto, Dr. Nova and Commander Zephyr are caught in the combustible tension between duty and forbidden love. As secrets are exposed and a coming crisis threatens all they know, each flame between them fuels a rebellion against the rules. Dare you track their wild ride? Dr. Nova Aldrin's shuttle sliced through the endless void during its gentle approach to the Starhaven Orbital Research Station. Hovering above the shimmering, sapphire-plated surface of Viridia 7, the station was a glorious sight to behold, a testament to the future, where gleaming technology met the tissue of interstellar mythology. Nova felt a flutter of excitement echo her heart as it thrummed, the gentle pulse of blood matching the coursing thrum of the soft, pulsating glow of the seething lines of neon light that could presently be seen rendered along the contours of her viewports. The terminals, the one on top, at the start of the descent, offered a view of data like we had never seen before. Corridors, polished and radiant, with patties flickering with dynamic holographic data stretched before them, like conduits to worlds yet undiscovered. The atmosphere, laced with foreign cocktail of ionized energy and the aroma of exotic floral essences from the onboard biomes, suggested the potential for scientific marvels internal to the station. It was as if every surface, every structure within the sanctum, whispered of a legacy threaded in precision and artistry, enticing Nova into a wondrous realm where technology and age-old cosmic tradition rested side by side like threads of the same tapestry. Wearing a sleek research suit equally at home in the fields of Mulania and ballroom of the Imperial Palace, Nova filed off the shuttle with the kind of quiet force of will that only engineers can muster. The datapad, storing her most radical theories and years of painstaking research, glimmered in her hand. On the smooth, echoing floor, her every step was infused with curiosity that would never be tamed, a longing to know what secrets lay at the heart of Starhaven. The station was a synesthetic work of art. Open crystalline expanse laced together with darkened, ancient metal, meandering corridors that defied gravity and vast spaces so open, it felt like everything was floating in eternal tension between harmony and disorder. But in the heart of Starhaven, a different story was being told. In a sprawling briefing chamber bathed in a galaxy of interactive star charts and strategic schematics, Commander Zephyr KLYX looked down upon a convocation of high-ranking officials. He was a man you looked up to, an authoritarian at heart. Every move he made and calmly uttered command, further proving his devotion to order. Zephyr wore an immaculate uniform, so starched and pressed that it reflected the unforgiving overhead lights of the hall, mimicking the inflexible temperance of the station's regulations, alive in flesh to ensure that the human endeavor remained in harmony with the vibrant chaos of the cosmos. Instructions passed down from the higher echelons of the power structure to the local enforcers reverberated throughout the humans and their equipment. Designed to avoid any personal entanglements in a shared living quarters, the station's infamous one bed, one rule policy, revealed with cold precision in the morning briefing, forbade any and all coupling. If Starhaven had a pulse, it was organic, life-giving and leavened with the detours of human experience. This was something else entirely. Nova's trajectory took her through a deserted research wing, a haven for revolutionary experiments and exotic life systems. It whispered of adventures, wonders, and secrets healed in the crystal fine. The station was a museum of the future, with hard, clinical updates of high-tech fizzled alongside murkily archaic philosophical graffiti. This was less an outpost of traversal than a smorgasbord of the enigmas of the cosmos. Even in that first, breath-stealing moment of arrival, Nova knew that Starhaven was no mere destination. It was an odyssey in the making, a place where every rule might be broken, every limit reimagined. This dance between illumination and intangibility, order and chaos, hinted at the unparalleled discoveries that awaited. Discoveries not merely of the mind, but of the spirit and of the vast, uncharted territories of the universe. Surprises on Nova's first day in Starhaven after a whirlwind tour of the station's gleaming corridors and frenetic common areas. She was assigned her housing. Curious but hesitant, she was guided down a series of narrow, dimly lit passages by a station coordinator whose crisp, impersonal tone revealed little of the news he bore. At the far end of the hall, Nova stepped into a small living quarter that was clearly not made for isolation, but for forced closeness. The room was unadorned and sparsely furnished, save a single, glossy sleeping pod that sat primarily in the room in cold utility. A digital placard plastered on the wall reminded its occupants in no uncertain terms of the one bed, one rule policy, a regulation to stifle any potential personal entanglements that might threaten the order of life aboard Starhaven. While Nova took in her new surroundings, a loud knock sounded from the adjacent door. Taking a steadying breath, she opened it to see none other than Commander Zephyr KLYX. The commander stood in the narrow entryway, emanating disciplined authority. His face was inscrutable, angry but laced with a faint suggestion of regret. At that moment, Nova understood that they were fated to be linked by more than just chance. They were linked by the results of an arrangement neither had requested, and that would dictate how the next coming days played out, in the most significant and the subtlest of ways. The corridor that led away from their common living space was a Spartan allotment of functionality and futuristic aesthetics. The holographic art on the walls was minimal and bright, faded away by the ambient light, blurred, long shadows mixing with the essence of the room. Nova and Zephyr mumbled breezy hellos, their words laced with unspoken tension. The atmosphere separating them crackled with tension, every syllable contained, every look heavy with the threat of wars to come. The sleeping pod was a silent arbiter of rules and order inside that cramped quarter. Nova's head swam with conflicting feelings of scientific curiosity and personal fear. When she began to unpack her things for this journey, her precise array of research tools, computer pads of data filled with theories, collected mementos from a life committed to the search for knowledge. Every one of them seemed to be put in the room as a minor challenge to the sterile authority of Starhaven. The objects called secrets of a life wanted connection on this side of professional obligation. Zephyr surveyed the room from across it with the kind of careful scrutiny only a seasoned commander could bring. His meager possessions were laid out with military precision. A compact case containing personal insignia, a handful of prized memories of a pre-order time when order could not always serve as his single guiding principle. His gaze flicked briefly to Nova's, an invitation and apology wrapped into one. It was the unspoken reality that sat with them in that garden, as though both were aware, even if neither spoke it aloud, that though they differed greatly from one another, their forced living arrangement would not only challenge their understanding of the rigors of Starhaven, but also force them to measure the limits of their own hearts against one another. As they navigated the delicate weave of the universe around them, the solitude of space embraced them like a familiar shawl, unfurling against the fabric of the station, a sanctuary that draped the echoes of engines and the symphony of long-distance conversations around them. The air was thick with both possibility and danger between them, a living history of the capricious knots of personal longing and institutional function. But what had started as an unwelcome partnership was quickly evolving into a war of wills and feelings, where every shared moment of tacit silence and carefully chosen phrase could be the pivot to tip the precarious balances between duty and rebellion. So within the steadfast grip of Starhaven's rigid systems, a risky exploration of stress, growth, and the come-to-call of forbidden affinity began. After their first confrontation, the quarters of Starhaven became the scene of more silent power plays, and unexpected alliances were formed. The cramped quarters, with its bare-bones aesthetic and single, unyielding sleeping pod, was both a constant reminder of the rule and a crucible of the slowly heating tension between Nova and Zephyr. Some mornings, their conversations would follow the predictable beat of sterilized coffee brewed in the station's communal kitchen, a place where holographic menus and crisp digital announcements set the tempo of existence. Nova, always a seeker asking disruptive questions, would spark little dialogues. "It seems almost as if the morning light here is trying to tell a story," she would say as she looked out at the tiny viewport that framed a piece of the infinite cosmos. Zephyr, precise with his clothing and blood pressure packing, had just nodded and said, "It's simply the job of day and night here, Doctor." And yet, underneath that basic exchange was the undertow of something unsaid, a gauntlet, a question, and Ember neither were quite ready to admit. As the hours passed, the terse greetings between the pair gave way to delicately broached conversations about the countless mysteries of the station. Nova found herself intrigued by Zephyr's methodical focus, his precision complementary to her own chaotic enthusiasm for discovery. But in those hushed parts of the research wing, as Nova recorded the day's samples from the experimental biomes the station held, Zephyr would linger outside her lab, an almost comfort, but an also discomfort in his presence. They turned from protocol. At first there was a flurry of protocol, to the more personal. Nova's voice would soften while she described the complex details of an alien ecosystem, her curiosity literally lighting up her face. In return, Zephyr would occasionally drop military wisdom, a balance of strategic caution and an unexpected, rare flash of personal opinion. Their banter was a playful flip between opposites. Nova's descriptions were sometimes lively, almost animated, filling the air with a quality that was almost lyrical, conjuring images of distant galaxies whose life forms were beyond imagination. Each species has its own poetry. She mused at one such exchange, her hands sweeping in the air as if trying to wrest the ethereal from the ether. It was only Zephyr, unfazed as ever in his rigid discipline, who retorted with brief but biting reminders of the necessity of structure, of order. "And every system has rules," he answered, his voice delivering its cadence as measured and deliberate as the ticking of a finely tuned clock. Here, there were gaps, or at least, potentials catching between the two, those unseen hinges and levers of mutual understanding, the pull and the weight, the approach and the landing, the jarring tang of indirect engagement thrilling on the ear. I recognized the static state of confusion, iron outlines of the stage between them, the encouraging push of connection. Often all I had above had been degrees of interpretation, a boundary, a crossing. In between these dialogues, little acts of rebellion emerged. Zephyr had no straying from the straight and narrow. Very suddenly, it would be no purpose turning back. Nova's hair would be expensive, but it would always pale in comparison to the lustrous strands left behind by the wind as she carried on ambient conversations on whatever they achieved. With an ever-playful glint in her eye, Nova would leave one of two things on Zephyr's otherwise pristine bedside: a meticulously folded note or an abstract sketch rendered in the shapes of the station's bouncing reflections. And so Zephyr's responses, even when they came, were couched compliments enshrined in official memos or an unlikely warming of his gaze when their eyes met in passing. The operation nor communications seemed to be going well. The station itself, a sentient amalgam of light, metal, joints, and whispers, observed these events from the shadows. The corridors echoed the soft hum of advanced machinery and the distant murmurs of interstellar flight, a background sound to the slow metamorphosis taking place in that little, unwanted arrangement. With each passing moment, the space between them seemed to shrink, a magnetic pull drawing them together in a dance of opposites, the enigma of it all threatening to consume them, but also weaving a story that neither could have anticipated. As the end of the day approached, and the fake dusk of Starhaven permeated their quarters, Nova and Zephyr found themselves, once again, too far apart, as they lay on the opposite ends of the lone sleeping pod. In this sacred silence, the air crackling with the unsaid, the uncomfortable, but alluring tension of desires left unexplored, the ambient noise of the station folded into the thunder of their hearts against their ribcage, every beat a vow that spoke louder than words. This tension between them was not the whimsy of the moment, but the braiding of something greater, something that, so long deep as they remained aboard Starhaven, could shake and reshape the very universe in which they existed. A low, insistent alarm broke the silence of Starhaven's controlled corridors, sending ripples up the station like an ominous echo of the void. With trembling hands, Nova fiddled with her instruments in the lab, the steady noise of data interrupted by a string of urgent alerts. Outside the reinforced window of her lab, swirling anomalies in the nearby research quadrant suggested an environmental disturbance, an event, unprecedented in its impact, that violated the balance of the station that had taken decades to maintain. In the heart of the command center, Commander Zephyr KLYX stood before a series of flashing scales of holographic screens with critical data points, shifting trajectories in space and interstellar communications. His piercing eyes pored over a stream of data. Gone was the calm precision of his military bearing, replaced by an intensity that belied the severity of the situation. In the other chamber, specialists muttered quick, fragmentary reports. Mercurial energy flares on the threshold of an unexplored quadrant, anomalous gravity wells, and spectroscopic readings of unnamed phalanxes coalescing in distant orbits. Dr. Aldrin, I require your expertise. Immediately, Zephyr's voice cut through the intercom, even and authoritative. His voice bore not just the weight of responsibility, but an unmistakable urgency. Nova stepped out from her lab with a look of distress and strength on her face, and made her way to the command center. And in the air was a certain tension. Nova was checking environmental diagnostics at a central console. These readings, they're not documented, nothing like it was ever seen before, she muttered, her eyes moving between streams of data. There's an energy spike out here that indicates an alien presence, or maybe some unidentified reaction in the station's own ecosystem. Her tone, equal parts scientific watchfulness and growing panic, matched the gravity of the oncoming crisis. Zephyr jumped in, his tone terse but pensive. We have to expect the worst. The station's diplomatic thread is already thin. Any mistake could trigger a full-scale interspecies war. The years that defined his life, the ones that made him believe in order and law above all else. Yet here it all was crumbling in an instant. And looking down at the holographic projections, he felt better than the weighty presence of his years. An idea, a plan that would require the cooperation of everyone, every being, every technology, even, and perhaps most especially when it meant going against the very laws he demanded, lived, and breathed. The war room became a hub for strategic conversations among senior military officials. Nova's voice smoothed over the harsh technical jargon with explanations that drew links between science and diplomacy. There is a risk of destabilization to the ecosystems here, and on Viridia, 7 beyond, she said, her hands drawing invisible patterns over the projections. If it escalates, it could have a snowball effect, pulling in hostile forces from outside our current alliances. Zephyr narrowed his eyes, weighing his options. We have to contain the source of the disturbance and seal up the perimeter, he commanded. His commands, direct and authoritative, compelled teams to mobilize, deploying contingency plans that had been sharpened for moments like these. But even as he spoke, his eyes would slide briefly to Nova, a tacit admission that her input was vital, not just to settle the crisis, but to stay afloat in the stormy seas of alien relations. In quiet sidebar conversations between military tacticians and scientific experts, the room hummed in equal measure of fear and determination. The crisis, external though it was quickly becoming an intimate battleground for the station's collective identity. Nova's technical recap on Zephyr's strategic meeting had begun to intertwine, as if both were falling prey to a torment that over time they began meeting base on common ground. Where Nova expounded on the risks and Zephyr established the tactical play, theirs was a rarer dialogue, each word falling into place in such a way as to expose their soft underbellies, that they understood what was at risk, something far beyond protocol and into the order of trust and survival and the viability of Starhaven itself. The tension rose with the crackle of distant communications reporting from the Allied outposts. Tentative transmissions spoke of an escalating confrontation in a nearby sector, a flashpoint that, should it catch fire, could unravel years of precarious diplomacy. Even the interstellar coalitions, which had been sustained out of shared admiration and firm laws, were teetering. Beneath the chaos swirling around, the command center had become a crucible of resolve. Nova and Zephyr, and yet there was the ever-precarious sensation of neediness growing in their previous caution. The two of them together were the key in an urgent effort to understand and contain the anomaly before it turned into a conflict that might drag the station, and maybe the whole region, into war. As alarms smothered into an eerie drone, holographic maps quaked with uncertainties. Both Nova and Zephyr understood, in that charged moment, that the storm they were weathering was not just outside their walls, but echoed within their own hearts. For the undercurrent of challenge was now yielding friction between duty and possibility, but the station was a bastion of order in a disordered universe. And so it was, as the crisis unfolded, that the story of Starhaven stepped into its cosmic role, an intersection of science, strategy, and the delicate strands of human contact, ready to reshape the fundamental experience of existence in the universe. It was the deepening twilight of Starhaven's corridors through which the chain of duty stretched, and the weight of that chain was beginning to crack the rigid facade Nova and Zephyr had built so high, so carefully. Late in the day, once the trappings of crisis management had been put aside, became a time of surprising vulnerability. The purr of factories, vibration, and echoes of distant travel receded in a hush of intimacy, as if the station had turned its curtains to correct secrets below they had never meant for the official glare. And somehow Nova found herself loitering in the dimly lit alcoves of the research wing, going over detailed data and samples that had been taken from the anomaly. Every reading she got on her portable holo device flickered with an uncanny, almost poetic cadence, a raw and universal metronome that spoke directly to the unexplained whispers in her soul. In those silent hours, the lines between science and sentiment blurred, and she began to recognize beauty in the chaos of number patterns and alien biomes. It was in a moment like that Zephyr arrived at the threshold of her lab, silhouetted against the shifting neon of passing spaceships. Missing the stiffness of military precision, he had a tentative demeanor. "Nova," he said, his voice lower than it had ever been in command briefings. "I've been looking over your reports. The way you see those phenomena, it's like you're reading poetry in the universe's code." Yes, her feelings for him was that special that his admission was simple and sincere, which made her feel something weird which was also breaking protocol. That exchange witnessed the narrowing of the gulf between order and emotion, giving way to an understanding neither had anticipated in each other. Their talks became more frequent and less guarded. Between technical analyses and strategy meetings, stolen moments in narrow corridors or quiet corners turned into opportunities for shared revelations. Nova shared bits about her past dreams, not just the grand scientific pursuits that had brought her to Starhaven, but also the very human longing for companionship that frequently made her feel more alone than ever on the open cosmos. And in turn, it was Zephyr who shared pieces from his past, a time when he was not the stoic commander he was becoming, a time he too had let some form of hope seep through the iron bar structure of his duty. In one especially charged moment, as rain of stardust fell lightly outside the station's panoramic observation deck, Nova produced a small sketch she had made, a visual interpretation of the anomaly. The signs it comprised stitched together not just scientific data, but the rhythms of a song that spoke both of order and of chaos, of music and of noise, a cosmic dance between light and darkness, between prisms and shadows, and more hashtags than you had ever seen in your life. Zephyr's eyes, ever careful and proud, softened as he looked at the drawing. "It's beautiful," he said, his voice heavy with a man who has not spent much time speaking the language of art. "Maybe there's more to these rules than we know. Maybe even chaos can be harmonious." This dance of words, an intricate infusion of techno-speak and pristine vulnerability, formed a secret orchestra, each hushed laugh and low voice a note underscoring the illicit chemistry that was kindling between them. Every word, every glance was a small act of defiance against the strict one bed, one rule mandate that hung over their lives. In the closeness of those late hours, the station's cold, clinical walls dropped away, exposing instead the warm, surging heart of human contact. But though these embers were starting to smolder, both Nova and Zephyr knew the dangers. As they grew closer, their conversations tinged with the potential for a relationship that could change everything. So too did the tension run beneath their dynamic, a fine line between the exhilaration of familiarity and the nagging fear that it all must come to an end. Each stolen moment captured not only their evolving relationship, but also the rules that threatened to divide them. But it was in the quiet exchange of glances and half-finished sentences, among the click and clack of a station that moves through space with the efficiency of a well-honed machine, where the foundations of a forbidden romance were laid. There was Nova and Zephyr, two souls trapped in their own tormented dichotomies of fervor versus duty, who started to see a future in which the suffocating walls of society could dissolve for the cathartic simplicity of human compassion and intimacy. And thus, as night fled over Starhaven, the first true sparks of defiance flickered, small yet potent promises of change, waiting for the moment that fate finally succumbs to need. And the halls of Starhaven were alive, as a renewed urgency coursed through her, twisted reflections of storm seething outside and in the souls of all trapped within. The station had become a hot core of duty and lust, where every discreet utterance and furtive look took on the gravitas of forthcoming choices. And in the heat of both the street and the powder keg, the third moment came, a moment calling forth sacrifice, bravery, and obliteration of every old boundary. Back in the command center, adrenaline was in the air. Holographic projections danced with dashes of data and real-time photographs of crises in process. Her back to the room, Nova stood at one of the interfaces, her face lit by moving patterns of light and shadow as she delved into the anomaly's most recent evolution. The data showed that the event was not just a common environmental disturbance, but rather a complex, almost intentional energy formation, something that may have been conceived by extraterrestrial intelligence. Each measurement gave clues of secret messages behind the cosmic code, as if the universe itself was making contact, probing the boundaries of human comprehension. Meanwhile, Commander Zephyr KLYX was conducting a symphony of decisive actions, his voice piercing the ambient noise like the note of a finely tuned instrument. So used to keeping his eyes trained only by duty, now they betrayed the war inside him brought on by the illicit intimacy he'd let bloom with Nova. His fingers clenched the console tightly, issuing orders to secure key sectors of the station, his voice firm but tinged with personal conflict. In that fraught atmosphere, the station's crisis had taken on the quality of a crucible, where personal and professional realms collided. The breakthrough occurred in an isolated conference room, a stark, minimalistic space with translucent panels that bent the ambient light into spectral colors. So, here, where Zephyr summoned Nova for a private audience, isolated from the watchful eyes and unyielding hierarchies of the command center. The door closed behind them with a gentle hiss, enclosing them in a temporary bubble of intimacy amid chaos. Zephyr's posture was upright, his countenance grave, as he spoke with resignation. "Nova," he started, and his voice was steady but heavy with unspoken emotion. "We are at a crossroads. And for the anomaly, we can now predict that every step we take will have ramifications far beyond what we have to date on our radar. I will not, cannot, let personal attachments interfere with the judgment that is critical in this crisis." His words, though uttered in the cold logic of military precision, nevertheless included an undercurrent of vulnerability. Nova's defiance and tenderness were etched in her eyes, which found his. "And yet, Commander," she replied gently, "it is our very connection that has provided us clarity. All those equations, every calculated risk, they all come from the trust we've built. Do we have to lose that connection just because that's how it's supposed to be?" Her tone was a gentle demand, a challenge to the very hierarchy that had ruled them for so long. That was when the light turned. Features strained with a conflict that raged inside Zephyr. "I am giving an ultimatum," he said, the words barely audible above the tension in the air. "Either we play by the book, from the small print to the greatest detail, keeping our worlds strictly apart, or we choose the route where our joint knowledge, our very humanity, defines our success. But understand this. All the fragile steps toward putting protocol aside need to be taken with absolute acknowledgement of the associated risk. Our careers, the safety of Starhaven, the delicate alliances that keep this station operating, all at stake." His ultimatum was not simply a loyalty test to duty, but a cry for awareness of the transformative nature of vulnerability, a challenge to the outdated constructs that had shaped their lives for too long. Nova's heart raced in her chest, and she felt exhilarated and terrified all at once as she considered the weight of his words. "Well, your instruction was simple. Keep playing by the same strict fucking rule that has been prevailing your entire life, or gamble it all on not even the promise of something better, but a bunch of nodes sparking together that suggests intimacy with a bunch of people who may or may not have been assembled as sepulchral aphorisms." It became a contest of wills and intellect. Nova's voice, painted with the blue fire torture of discovery, argued that in a cosmos as unpredictable and wondrous as their own, revulsion was the enemy of exploration. Zephyr responded with the clear, cold pragmatism of a soldier who had borne witness to too many systems twisting in the heat of unchecked passion. But, even as their words were at odds, a flicker of understanding began to take shape, an agreement that all too often the greatest risk yielded our greatest reward. Beyond that room, alarms blared, and the personnel station struggled against the intensifying incursion. But inside those walls, the stakes were much more personal, a fragile, desperate dance on the brink of chaos. And he and Nova both felt, in the echoing silence left behind by Zephyr's ultimatum, that now everything that followed would echo throughout the lifeblood of Starhaven itself and what it meant to serve, to love, and to live within the cold, wrecking jaws of space. In that defining moment, with the forbidden spark between them burning hotter than a supernova, the line between duty and desire faded into irrelevance. The commander's last words, suffered with both will and desire, sealed their fates. It was a volatile road to take, the stakes unfathomably high, yet the prospect of this mutual moment of truth, of peeling back the facade of protocol, became the North Star neither Khamenei nor Trump could deny. Following Zephyr's disastrous ultimatum, the halls of Starhaven had reverberated with the legacies of choices made in the throes of raw desperation. And the once smooth hallways now radiated an animosity that flickered in every word and drifted like smoke in every stare exchanged between shipmates. As a crisis settled, the station appeared to pause, torn between the deadly cataclysmic forces unleashed by the anomaly and the transformations that occurred within its insides. Nova's long hours in the lab involved poring over reams of data that had taken on a new dual significance. The energy readings of the anomaly, once a source of scientific curiosity, had become a symbol of crisis, a reflection of the internal turmoil that stirred within the souls of the dwellers of Starhaven. But in each spectral pattern, each deviation in the cosmic dance, Nova, an unlikely witness to the changing disco ball lights of the universe, bristled not just at the phenomena themselves, but also at the rigid nature of the systems that determined their fall. And in the quiet crunch of her instruments, she came to perceive the quiet shimmers of a new order, potentially, one day, one that might square the circles of the seemingly unshakable demands of duty and emotion. Back on the home front, Commander Zephyr KLYX had landed in a political as well as emotional minefield. As the solid pillar that had previously been unbendable and straight, he now remained in the command center. Now, though his eyes belied the dilemma of a man who had put everything on the line for a relationship that broke all the rules, his orders, while still direct and commanding, held a note of caution in the knowledge that every decision now resonated with a level of personal consequence never before felt. Subtle murmur rippled through the ranks, rumors of the commander's uncharacteristic gentleness, and of an unspoken bond formed in defiance of the station's rigid imperatives. In a matter of days, which quickly transformed into weeks, the repercussions of that private ultimatum rippled visibly and invisibly throughout Starhaven. The station's variety of inhabitants suddenly started to challenge the centuries-old decrees that had long dictated their interactions. As they gathered in low lights in darkened alcoves, engineers, scientists, and security personnel alike discussed whether the iron wall between duty and personal life was an antique in a universe that operated on the whole of the unknown. The one bed, one rule policy, once a linchpin of the station's order, became a manifestation of institutional inertia, a rule whose price tag was seen not only in terms of sacrifice, but a lack of contact between people. The experiences Nova and Zephyr shared, however, helped precipitate subtle changes in the atmosphere of the station. In their formerly lonely corners, each eye contact and uncertain dialogue started to radiate outward, urging those around them to reconsider their own lives. Nova's colleagues were inspired by her tenacity in seeking knowledge and her subtle defiance of a system that valued conformity. The second-in-command on Zephyr, a stern yet perceptive officer named Marek, began to quietly question the costs of rigidly following the rules. These cracks in the wall, barely gazing out on the horizon, wrought of the finest filigree, and willful, sometimes intimated, Ideals were those with which the seeds of change had been sown, weak as a whisper, and yet as potent as new growths of liberty. Beyond the controlled depths of Starhaven, the developing diplomatic crisis continued to loom large. The energy anomaly, yet a serious issue among the allied races, now threatened an interspecies balance that had taken decades to achieve. Nova's scientific powers and Zephyr's strategic recalibration had bought them time, but at a cost. The scarring of the station's collective memory, further right-angled by its own hubris. In hushed briefing rooms and in the passionate deliberations of interstellar diplomats, the crisis was debated not only as a technical failure, but as a profound commentary on the importance of not losing faith in both order and unpredictability in any venture. For Nova, the personal toll exacted by the crisis was the price of sleepless nights and the unending second-guessing of her own motives. Alone in her small room, she remembered the electric moments with Zephyr, their murmuring confessions, the smiles we should not share, the sensation of danger, of excitement. She understood that every choice, every divulged secret, came with risks that reached beyond the boundaries of their recreation rooms. But within the hushed defiance of her heart, she also knew that the world was simply too big and too full of possibility to live in fear every moment. For Zephyr, the result is a continual bargaining between the serious obligations of command and the delicately growing allure of personal connection. In the harsh glow of the command center, he pored over reports and gave orders with the cool detachment expected of a military commander. But in the moments when his mind could stray beyond hounded and interrupted calls, he walked back in time to the soft cadence of Nova's voice and the insinuation that bloomed between them, a promise that transcended every protocol he'd ever kept. So Starhaven was cast into a new rhythm, and as it did so off swept the illusion of control, replaced with commotion and disruption at every turn as the winds of change slammed at its hull. The impact of that fateful meeting reverberated through every level of its life, undermining their most entrenched beliefs about duty, fragility, and the cost of a relationship. And so Nova and Zephyr remained at the core of something subtle but profound in the midst of all the sweeping changes. For their own stories showed that even in a universe of strict laws, the human spirit could still find ways to defy, ways to transform, ways to be boundless. When the crisis retreated from the foreground, Starhaven started to beat out a tentative new rhythm, a strange equilibrium between the imperatives of order and the fickle pulse of the human heart. In the station's central atrium, where holographic constellations still twinkled in a muted kind of splendor, Nova and Zephyr stood at the precipice of transformation. Both of their souls had been touched and changed, carved out by this profound connection and shaped by the mortal danger they had repeatedly encountered together over the years. With a pensive grace, Nova traversed the length of the atrium, her footsteps echoing inside smooth surfaces that knew nothing but the sharp whirs of duty. Subtle murals and digital art installations, all taking cues from the whispered stories of sacrifice and solidarity, adorned the space now. They talked about a community awakening to the potential of vulnerability and connection. This had only been achieved through the inner strength to take one small step beyond the known into the black, unimaginable realm of quantum potential. Nova's research had opened new understanding into the currents of energy that he wove through Starhaven, showing even the most fantastic of forces could be guided through equal parts reason and heart. Inside the command center, Commander Zephyr KLYX read the final reports on the crisis with a disciplined calm that concealed the tempest he had coped through. The station's leaders, inspired by the quiet mutiny he'd ignited with his own ultimatum, had started to scrutinize sacred do's and don'ts. Officers and scientists alike found themselves holding quiet debates in corridors and meeting rooms now, and wondered how to harmonize equally unpredictably brilliant human emotion with the unremitting, unyielding logic of protocol. For Zephyr, every choice from here on out was burdened by that lesson, a reminder that strict adherence to the letter of duties could quench the flares of good. He had come to learn, gradually, that rules, while helpful, must, at times, give way to what makes life feel alive and combustible. Far away from the watchful eyes of the higher-ups on the station or the people under his command, Nova and Zephyr met in a small, private corner of the place. The muted glow of a privately arranged hololamp fell soft shadows on their faces while they covered a new plan, a framework for modified living conditions and practices that respected the human need for connection without eroding the spirit of Starhaven's work. Their exchanges were soft and intentional, a slow rhythm that combined the scientific and the poetic. Nova's passionate but measured words and Zephyr's careful, thought-through responses formed a tapestry of mutual respect and shared vision. They spoke with a weight of understanding that one day, there would be a life ahead where duty could falter before the power of human emotion, the power of stories that echoed past the stony bars of expectations. As weeks stretched into months, the changes started to take hold. The long-standing one bed, one rule came under review, giving way to a guideline that fosters cooperation, compassion, and even the potential for personal relationships that added a richness to the station community. Infused by the silent upheaval brought forth by two unexpected companions, Starhaven's denizens stepped into this new age with a quiet hope. In low murmurs down long hallways and passionate debates in common rooms, the story of the crisis was recontextualized, not as a moment of weakness or failure, but of growth and evolution. It was a signal from the heavens. The station was transubstantiated. Where there had once only been the click of the protocol's cold calculations, there was now an undercurrent of warmth, a pulse that acknowledged that the unpredictable, but necessary, human heart had entered the MPI's halls. With Nova and Zephyr forever altered by their journey, the two went on to create the unimaginable. Their connection, devoid of enforced statutes and hidden behind rigid docility, flourished amongst the clear ring of trust and the rhythm of cyclone hopes. Their story became a living testament to the station's new theory of the case. Even in a universe governed by intractable laws, the willingness to change can ignite a renaissance of connection, compassion, and hope. In those last ephemeral moments in the dusk of one such evening, when the last rays of the star made room for the copper light of an in-development sunset, Nova and Zephyr stood together on the viewing deck of Starhaven. Before them lay the far reaches of the cosmos, an infinite tapestry of mystery and promise. They said nothing, for there was nothing to say. There was a silence between them, however, that was filled with an understanding deeper than the cold reassurances they had been trading, a commitment to a future when rules could be rewritten in the light of shared understanding, a moment when every spark, even those forbidden, could light the way to the dawn. It had been a dangerous odyssey, the very fate of a universe hanging in the balance. But standing there in the quiet embrace of infinite space, they both realized that they had risen above the limitations of the past. In the warm glow of the starry horizon, Starhaven had not only endured, it had transformed into a forest of promise visible from the edge of the world.